Hi, this is Paul. The following is a video that I'm not in. So if you're not interested in this, then that's just fair warning because I'm not in it. But it was a conversation that Jacob had with Kathryn and Eamon Wilson, who were the organizers of the Thunder Bay Conference, and Father Eric, who attended the Thunder Bay Conference. And all of these individuals have been neck deep in or at least three of them have been neck deep in the Bridges of Meaning Discord server and in this little corner of the internet, and I'll have followed a lot of these conversations carefully. And Jacob orchestrated this and put this on his channel. And I thought it was a really tremendous sort of thinking about the importance of the Thunder Bay event, which is why I'm sort of putting it on the time slot that I've posted all the other Thunder Bay events, and thought it would make a good video to include with all of those other videos. I thought the conversation was tremendous, and there was a lot of important stuff in it. It's fairly long, of course, but Jacob's channel is very small, and so most of you wouldn't get a chance to see this. But I thought there was a lot of good reflection on what's happening in this little community. Why is it important? So, of course, Father Eric is a member of the Roman Catholic Church. Eamon and Kathryn are both Protestants. Jacob is Hasidic Jew. So there's a fair amount of diversity in terms of perspective on this. Jacob is a very interesting individual. He's a very creative thinker. He's got a lot of his own ideas, and he's been a very big asset in this little corner of the internet. So I asked Jacob if I could share this on my channel, and he jumped back, yes, please. So he was very enthusiastic about me sharing this, and I'm very enthusiastic about sharing it. So I hope you enjoy it as much as I did.
Shalom. I am here with the Reverend Father Eric Seitz and Dr. Eamon Wilson and his lovely wife, Kathryn Wilson. And we are going to discuss what happened at Thunder Bay and what we can learn from that and take forward with us. So take it away, guys.
Well, first of all, it's nice to see you, Eric. I haven't seen you since the conference, so this is nice. I've been curious, since we said we were going to do this, I've been curious what your thoughts have been since the conference, what your takeaways were.
Yeah. So I had to leave early Sunday afternoon. I had things going on the Monday afterwards that I couldn't miss. So I had that long drive across Minnesota back to North Dakota then, and while I was driving back, all I could think about was ecumenism, and just the quality of conversations that I was able to have with different people there. Really, it's just my mind was going in that direction. Like and I guess something I would want to see is see if we can bring different churches together to be able to have that kind of quality of a conversation. So that was my first takeaway from that. It was especially interacting with. Did you meet Michael? He was probably about 6'4", Orthodox convert. Yeah, I got to interact with him a fair bit, and I think he certainly put that in my mind. But our conversation too, Eamon. Yeah, it was all just kind of swirling around in there. So yeah, that was my big five. So
Well, I'll say one thing about that. So there has been talk about something in the Southern California area, sometime maybe spring, maybe in the summer, maybe even in the fall. And I mentioned to somebody, we really need to invite the Roman Catholic Church as an organization, because I think part of it's important to recognize that the Catholic Church is represented by many people, but it is an organization, and it's a very large and important organization. And the response I got back, which made me laugh and will hopefully make you laugh, Father Eric, is we invited the Eastern Orthodox.
Have you seen the meme, right, where there's the two people standing there? It's like, are you guys friends? And the ones labeled Roman Catholics are like, yes. And the Eastern Orthodox are like, no.
Yes.
Well, my response was, I think at least in the United States, a lot of Eastern Orthodox are Protestants playing at being Roman Catholic, because the Eastern Orthodox, like, there's no official, well, there is the OCA, but like people go from one, patriarchate to another, and like float in a way that's very, very Protestant in the United States, that you wouldn't actually get to do in an, if you were in Greece or Russia or any place that has its own patriarchate. But besides that, you guys who organized it, hey Garth, what say ye? And we have an audience. There are people. If anybody in the audience wants to chime in and ask questions, certainly. But the Wilsons made Thunder Bay happen. What were important lessons you learned? What were things you would never do again? And what are your plans walking forward from here?
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the funny things about the conference was that we planned it like 2 years before it happened, because of COVID, right? So it
was 2019. We started planning it.
Yeah. So in some ways, sort of miraculous that it ever got off the ground at that point. But I think that gave us, it's like an interesting window, because I think no other conference I'll ever plan again will I have 2 years in which to kind of like let things, brew. One of the things that I think was really good was having 4 speakers.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was, it provided nice opponent processing, because we had 2 theists, 2 atheists or non-theists. So you had differences there. You had 2 more scientific, 2 not scientific. And I think because there was that, you were able to have people sort of within their own circle. So like, Richard and John could talk science, and Paul and Jonathan could talk faith. But so you had a little bit of like conversations within their own circle, but then across the aisle, obviously there was a lot of that too. And so I think getting a mix of both of those things, I really liked what that did to the overall conversation. So I think that's a takeaway that I would feel like we would want to mirror again.
Yeah. I was struck by how there's a hunger for this outside of our corner of the internet, both in conversations with Mondrell and Vervaeke. They both commented on how in the academic world there really is very little dialogue going on. I were having dinner one night, and I mentioned to Vervaeke my experience at the Canadian Psychological Association National Conference this past June, and the way that they set it up, they had 1 hour. They have one person headlining. You have 3 people presenting for 15 minutes, and then 15 minutes of Q&A. So basically, you're just getting an abstract. There's no real engagement. I wasn't impressed. I was asking questions afterwards of the presenters. Most of them were at arm's length from anything they were presenting on. And Vervaeke just said, like, yeah, that's what's happening at the APA. That's what's happening in several different academic organizations. And Mondrell, I think it was after the first day, was just saying it's the most enjoyable time he's had in a quasi-academic setting in decades. Because it's, you come in, you present, you're gone, and you don't go deep, and you don't interact with one another. So I think we've tapped into something that's really needed everywhere, and people are hungry for it. I think people are tired of fighting and culture wars, and that just doesn't really go anywhere. So that was a big takeaway, and just the conversations with people who were attending. I heard that over and over again. I think to hear from two other people that are in academic circles that they were seeing what I felt like I was seeing. That was a big take home, and something that stuck with me.
It reminds me of.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So I'm listening to Awakening from the Reading Crisis when I'm working out right now. And recently in one of the episodes, Dr. Vervaeke was talking about how he wants cognitive science to integrate different disciplines, right? Like neurology, psychology, and all these different sociology, to be able to integrating those things and having them different disciplines, not only like come to some kind of a mutual understanding, but actually transform each other, right? Like to cause a shift, to cause a change. Not in that it like bulldozes or destroys, because he's not, doesn't want to do it in a reductive manner, but that they would this opponent processing, right? This changing relationship between them. And he actually used as a counterexample what most interreligious dialogue turns into is we talk to each other, we find common points of agreement, and the goal is mutual toleration and respect, which is great, but because it's nice to not have violence all the time.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I think I think that's what we were getting there, right? With the different people we were talking to, and the space that was created was where we could kind of lean into each other, we could kind of push on each other, and allow ourselves to be pushed a little, or to be changed, to receive that motion. Yeah.
So my question was, and I think that kind of butterflies with it, is do you think having it at a church or enhanced it, or would it be better? Because I know it might be easier in some ways to have conferences like this at a church or some religious environment, but you could also have it at a university or campus or something like that. And do you, what do you think may be some of the up and downsides of using a place like the Abbey as opposed to a university?
I think with the Abbey is not your typical church space, which is part of why I think it worked. On the top floor, I don't know, probably 20% of it is a coffee shop that's just open to the public, and the spaces within the Abbey are already being used for things like they have a dementia cafe for elderly people with dementia to come in and have coffee. They have it's a space for the community to come, really. So I think it was unique that it worked at the Abbey. I don't know if it would work as well at your typical like religious space. I could be wrong, but I think that the space of the Abbey is part of what facilitated it working so well.
Yet some folks said that they liked it because that it was a religious space, because there was religious art and stained glass windows, and so there was this sense of the conversation being more serious. The things that you're doing are more serious, and that there's a sense of like bringing in the transcendent into it, and so you're already taking things more seriously. But on the flip side, it also is probably an environment that is challenging for some people to enter.
Yeah.
Right. Like there's some people I know that wouldn't go to a conference held in a Catholic church. They wouldn't go, and I'm sure the flip is true. There's people who wouldn't want to go into a Protestant church, even if that church is regularly used by the community for tap dancing and recitals and whatever else. Just because it's a religious space, that's going to be an obstacle. I would hope, like, we have a really big community, like, in our corner of the internet. There's a lot of folks that are involved, and a lot of people who listen, even if they don't choose to join the discussion. And my hope would be that we would have these kinds of events happening in all kinds of contexts, so that it would facilitate different flavors of discussion. So religious centers holding the conversation might bring out some elements or attract different people, but then a university would attract others and make other people, and might bring a more scientific slant, the same way that a religious center might bring a more sacred kind of slant. My concern with the religious or a university is that the normal mode that you get into in a university is one of two. You have lectures and you have debates.
Yeah.
And my fear would be you get into that space and people would automatically slip into lectures and debates, which doesn't mean it can't work, but people would have to intentionally be conscious of the fact that they're choosing to not use those schemas when they're engaging with each other, unless they're asked to present a lecture. But even then, we ask the guys to design it to sort of be a platform for future conversation. It shouldn't be a closed-ended box of a presentation. So I would hope we'd have lots of different things. Sorry.
What was interesting about Urban Abbey, and this is something I picked up pretty quickly, is that the abbot, Scott, he never, to my recollection, ever described it as a church. And that's got to be intentional, because the word church just pops right out of most people, So he's very intentional about not using that word, and it's got to be to not bring along those kind of churchy, I already know what church is. I don't need to go there to learn anything, if you've had that, or so that made, I think, the space particularly suited to this conference. I was also surprised that the Baptist church had an image of Jesus in a former Baptist church had an image of Jesus in a stained glass window. They don't usually go for that. They're a little more Zwinglian, I think.
They are. Yeah, they are. But yeah, I know. I also found it surprising the first time I went to that church, when it was a Baptist church. It was probably 20 years ago, the first time I went in that building. And I was surprised when I first walked in. And they had other images of Jesus previously too, the church that had it. You go into, there's a women's Bible study and prayer room, and they had a couple pictures of Jesus on the wall there. And
where the coffee shop is now.
Where the coffee shop is now. I was like, this is an interesting Baptist church. And I grew up very iconoclastic. So that was like, at the time, it was a little boundary pushing for me.
Well, stained glass in general is not a very Protestant thing to have, right?
Well,
Yeah.
They'll do it sometimes, but it's usually abstract patterns, right?
Yeah.
Not, so anyway.
So let's talk about as far as big and small. I know one thing about having it in Thunder Bay was it was very difficult to get to. I actually considered flying in and flying out, and it was like, yeah, there's no flying in and flying out really quickly. And so, I mean, I'm kind of thinking possibly if it's in Los Angeles, then there's a lot of like, okay, lots of people very easily can come and leave, and it's convenient enough. I mean, Jordan Peterson is having 3 concerts in the Los Angeles area. 2 of them sold out so quickly that they got the Honda Center, which is 18,000 seats, for the third one, and I think it's going to sell out on short notice. And so there's a very different feel to something that may have,
Mhm.
hopefully, and I do hope this corner of the internet will one day have 18,000 people at our conferences. Uh, but when I talk to some of the other people in our corner of the internet, the idea of an 18,000 uh, person conference is the last thing they would ever want, because having a small gathering of people talking together, cohorts, cliques, right? So is is there a um, a certain aspect to which maybe we do want to have these types of things in somewhere that it is far outside of the norm, and you get a small number of people, and do we want to also have big things where you feel like you went to a concert, right? And now you're a deadhead for Paul Vanderklay, and you know, um, how do you keep how how do you keep the large and small? How do you keep it from being mega church anonymity versus small house church type thing? Thoughts?
So I'm thinking that the size of the conference and the amount of time you got to spend with just individual participants actually makes that transformative dialogue more possible. Um, the fact that I would keep on bumping into the same person over and over again, the fact that I could get to know their story a little bit, and I couldn't do that with everybody that was there, but I was able to do that with enough people, where you can actually build relationships. Uh, like that's certainly something that, and I don't remember. Did we have 200 people there?
About 150.
150. That's something that 120 to 150 crowd, Dunbar's number. Hello. It can actually provide. But maybe the bigger things have other things too. So
Yeah, I would think a larger conference, it would have to be either you would have to find a way to be able to break down into smaller groups, or it would just be a totally different feel. Like it's a different agenda. You're going for a different feel, and yeah, the like you said, we're like a concert. The action's all on the stage. We're not trying to bridge that gap as much. So I think you could, if you broke it into groups that were that smaller number, and you intentionally, I think it's possible. Or you could just say, yeah, we're going for a totally different thing, and it's one. I would be sad if it completely took over and there was no smaller gatherings, but I think to also have a larger gathering, sometimes that's nice for folks who maybe are a little intimidated by the idea of a group where you would be seen and known. You can kind of put your foot in the water with a big group. There's some anonymity there, and it can have the feel of like I'm among a lot of people who are like-minded and value what I value, and so that can reinforce what I value, for good or for ill. But so I do think there's a place for bigger gatherings, but I think it would have to have a different flow than the one that we did in Thunder Bay.
And I mean that's present certainly in Catholicism too. So you've got your Sunday congregation. You could also go to daily masses, which you'd have maybe 40 people there, and you could get to know them pretty well. And you could also go to a big mass with the Pope with 500,000 of your closest friends. So it's like and all of that's Catholic. So I'm sure there's similar ways of doing things in other churches.
Yeah, it's so right now tonight is the last part of the Festival of Booths, and during uh, this year, apparently after the whole COVID thing, so there is the priestly blessing that's done at the temple, which obviously, like, this is something that has not been done for many for thousands of years, and apparently they had a group of some 500,000 people for the priestly blessing at the temple. Yeah, which is far beyond anything we do in Judaism, because during high holidays, it's prohibited to use sound amplifications. So I haven't seen the videos yet, but there are videos of stuff like that. But I think it is important to have both aspects at some. There's something about being part of a group of thousands of people that creates a certain rhythm and solidarity with anonymity that, while being in a smaller group, is so. I actually would like to see both kinds of things, and sometimes you can have, okay, so we have these large, presentations or whatever, and we have smaller breakout groups. um, but yeah.
There are some of the personalities in this little corner of the internet, and I speak specifically of Pastor Paul, who would probably hate to be a VIP and have VIP tickets. Because if you have 18,000 people, it's like not, like I got to just kind of hang out with Paul, and it was great. And but yeah, we got 18,000. It's going to be a little less possible because the big three that people came to see. There was always somebody who wanted to hang out with them, wanted their attention, all that. Even with just a paltry 150 people there.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Eamon, I'm not going to let you be quiet.
Well, I've been thinking about this a lot over the last week or so. I think ideally you would have both. With larger scale, I'm not sure what it will take for what's happening here to grow, because we don't have a central figure or set of ideas. It's more a way of relating to one another, and I've wondered how that scales, and how a larger movement is created from that. And I keep hitting dead ends. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I'm not really sure. Not really sure how that would work, to be having multiple events of, we had 18,000 people. I would speak to something really big happening, but I'm not sure what that would be.
Okay, I am going to introduce something. You guys are all going to be very surprised at me introducing it. But I talked to Kathryn about this a little bit, and Paul Vanderklay introduced me to this movement in Toronto, actually, which is calling itself the Jesus Movement. And they talked a lot about the difference between a centered group and a bounded group.
Mm-hmm.
And I think actually you kind of need both centered and bounded groups. So with the bounded groups, you have a boundary, and some people are inside and some people are outside. And I do think we do kind of need that. With a centered group, you have something that is a focal point, and it keeps people focused together as a group on one thing, or how far distant they are. And I'm probably as distant as you can get while still being centered on Jesus. And frankly, I am perfectly fine. And the best I can figure is it's kind of unfortunate that the meeting house in Toronto has been having problems, which has to do with people misbehaving. But to me, it seems for this corner of the internet to have a Jesus-centered, and if you honestly are Jesus-centered, right? If it's really okay, all we're gonna say is this is focused on Jesus, and obviously my conception of Jesus is very different from any all three of you, but other people. But I think there's something to be said about a human being and that human being's life, which allows us to put away maybe the dogmas and the creeds, which work better for a bounded set, because you can say, hey, you know what, I look towards this person, and this is one of my favorite images to show on this channel. It is a painting, I believe, from like 500 years ago called Christ Crucified. And for me and my channel, this has been a focal point. And I'm guessing, like, if people were to say, well, who would say we should center on this? I'm guessing Father Eric would be number 1 on that list, and I would be number 4 on that list in this little discussion. But for me, I think at least for me, and the Vervaeke types might not be as happy, but maybe the Pajot and Vanderklay types would be. I am perfectly fine with this being the central icon towards which we gather. Yeah, what do you guys think?
I mean, I'm all for it, but not hard to convince me. So, yeah, and that's something that with a 2,000-year-old tradition that I'm in, we struggle to do. We struggle, because oftentimes the momentum of tradition, the institutions, these things can take your focus off what's at the center. A little gotcha question I'll sometimes play with Catholics. I'll be like, hey, who's the head of the Catholic Church? And people will say?
The Pope.
They'll say the Pope.
They'll say the Pope. We're like, no, Jesus is the head of the Catholic Church. The Pope works for Jesus. He is the vicar of Christ, which means he's not Christ. So yeah, just like, oh yeah, and I usually get a little chuckle out of that because I try to make it lighthearted. But yeah, keeping that focus on Jesus can actually be difficult.
Can we convince the Protestants of this? I call what do they call it? Iconolatry and idolatry.
Iconolatry would be good and idolatry bad.
I don't think that's the way the Protestants look at it.
Probably not.
I've never
You've never heard of iconolatry?
No.
It is a term that Protestants use to explain why, and actually Jews also use, to explain why there are ancient images. So we are not actually, Judaism is not as iconoclastic as most Jews think it is, and it certainly wasn't 2,000 years ago. So having icons was not considered the problem. Worshipping icons is what Protestants would say, and mostly Jews would also say is a problem. And that term iconolatry is used as a I wouldn't say necessarily derogatory, but a
It's got the word latria, which is the Greek word for that which is given over to God alone. Yeah.
So exactly.
Yeah, it's, man, I feel so many tensions about it. Not so much as a Protestant. It's, I mean, obviously, as a Christian, I say yes, um, and then there's this part of me that is that sees that there's a space that's open right now, and I don't want that space to be closed for people who are maybe who are part of this corner of the internet and are participating. Um, I don't want them to feel like, well, now that space isn't open any longer, and they're going to be pushed out. Not that I think everyone would. More, I guess, a concern that I have. Does it then become so directed towards the theological, to the religious, that there isn't the same openness that's felt by them? And at the same time, I think, well, there has to be something there. And of course, I think that's the best. Right.
And the thing is when Dr. Peterson talks about Christ, people who aren't Christians can resonate with that, and we'll be honest, we're all here because of Jordan Peterson, and nobody would have been in Thunder Bay except riding in his wake,
Yeah.
So it's not as exclusive, because we look at a whole host of figures that are talked about in this quarter, Tom Holland and the Sargon fella,
Yeah.
people who are, not formally attached to any church, don't say they're believers, but still have a great admiration for Christ, or at least the story of Christ. So that's farther from the center, but still oriented towards it.
I think it works because they're not Christians. I think that I've thought of this, over the years, and I'm not alone. A lot of others have said this. It's like if Peterson were to become a Christian, would that just sort of end it all? That's
what Mark
closed, and I kind of think there's some truth to that. I think we need people who are not Christians saying, yeah, you know what, this vision of Jesus, this icon of Christ, yeah, I can be on board with that. And the minute that they're gone, I think it's done. I think it becomes a Christian thing.
So, as I was at a church this morning, and the discussion was focused on Isaiah, and they brought up Isaiah 53. And being the Jew in the room, somebody decided to ask, how do Jews not see Jesus in Isaiah 53? And the person directing it went, let's not have that discussion right now.
Very wise.
And the lady who asked it actually came up and apologized to me afterwards, which she did not need to do at all. So this makes me think that maybe, and if we are talking about Jordan Peterson, then maybe we can talk about the suffering servant. And the suffering servant is a type of Christ. It's a type of Christ that Peterson has spoken about a lot. It is from the Hebrew Bible. And one of the things I've been trying to do is reach out to Muslims more. I'm not sure how Muslims feel about this. By the way, Matt, you are new here. Welcome. Apparently, he went to Thunder Bay. But maybe a more acceptable image is the suffering servant, and you can take that to be Jesus or not as you feel is appropriate.
I
It's
really
just
like
more meat on Jesus, Like we could actually sit here and debate, reasonably who the suffering servant is. And Jesus was a man who lived 2,000 years ago. So I don't know if that would work.
I agree there's more meat on to the more fully fleshed out idea of Jesus Christ the man. I think the fact that it's not as filled in is what gives me, centering around the idea of the suffering servant, maybe creates more space for other people. Because I really would hate it if we created a center set group that then excluded a lot of people who have baggage around Christianity, around Christ, see it as closing off the conversation. I feel like that would really be a disservice to everybody. So I agree with you that it isn't as fully fleshed out, but given the goal of creating a conversation that is not just ecumenical, but is like even broader than it. Like, because what we want and what's been so good, I think, is that the space that we are in is very much like the courtyard. Like there's room for everybody to come. And basically the rules of engagement are you need to come with a certain attitude. It's a way of engaging. It's a way of being able to have a perspective, talk with one another without trying to lose that, but you genuinely are open and you're actually listening, and you come because you're willing to really engage. You're not just there to convert people or make yourself heard. Like it's real dialogue. But I so I would hate to lose that flavor, I think.
Eamon, I'm not going to let you be quiet.
I'm very similar thoughts to Kathryn. I have the same concerns and think that it creates more space by being less defined. Again, I'm going to be leaning in a certain direction on all of it and think that that Christ is the is a more clear embodiment of all of that. But I guess that's where the conversation happens in part. And the doorway can be a lot broader, more open than that.
Yeah, because I mean, we're talking about how do you create the space to continue to have the conversation we've all been having that best is a vessel for all of that. And then within that conversation, we can have our own particular voices, obviously. But I like that the suffering servant it's an archetype, but it's an archetype with a moral, like a very strong moral and ethical slant to it, because part of that is how we're going to be defining the mode that we come to one another in, right? Like we could easily flesh out, okay, what would it mean in these conversations or in this space to be willing to suffer, to engage in a way where you're willing to be the one suffering? How would you serve the other people in your conversation? How is the fact that you're willing to share your thoughts a way to serve other people? Like you can do a lot with that as the center focal point. That if we were to choose something more arbitrary, like just dialogue or something, it doesn't have the same kind of implicit sort of virtue.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, dialogue is just there's not much to it, right? Whereas with a person, with a human being, with Socrates, with Buddha, with Jesus, with whoever you want, it's like there's something there, a lot to wrestle with. We're more moved by people and examples than we are just by the concepts and ideas, they always come later when we're trying to figure it out, analyze it.
Yeah.
And I think about Jordan Peterson. He could talk about Christ from his position, and people found it really compelling and not off-putting at all. And maybe I don't know if you guys have ever talked to Mark Lefebvre, but he's very intent that we, the church people, should not be trying to convert Jordan Peterson. And he thinks that was a mistake, which is it's a
I
hard thought.
disagree.
Okay, well,
I
we need
have
to
to-
invite Mark in.
Well, okay.
And he
but
can make his points. I take that idea seriously. I'm not saying I agree with him.
I have to say, I think when a lot of people, when they ask me about this part of the internet, they say, "Oh, you're talking to people who are open-minded." It's like, no, actually, I'm not talking to people who are very open-minded at all. I'm talking to people who have a quiet confidence. And that quiet confidence is in an idea of the logos, which is, you are not going to teach me anything that is true, that is going to make me move away from my God. Because my God is the God of truth.
Mm.
And I have zero fear of the truth. I have fear of lies, right? So when I talk to Father Eric, I am not at all under the impression that I am suddenly going to make him believe any of the things I believe, or to Kathryn and Dr. Eamon here. But and that's not the point for me, certainly. And I think for a lot of people, the point isn't, okay, if I do convert you to my thinking, and to my extreme surprise, there are people who I have actually converted um, to my thinking. Um, and I have to say extreme surprise, because nobody ever agreed with me before in my life. Um, but uh, the I am perfectly happy if people agree with me. When we had the conversation, I'm not pulling punches, and that's what people actually like. Well, the people who like me, as opposed to the people who dislike me, and there's plenty of those, who think that I should be pulling punches, that I should be more polite and kind. When I talk about the Trinity, I don't pull punches.
Mhm.
It's polytheism. I'm not pulling punches. At the same time, I am speaking to people who that's not an affront to.
Mhm.
That's not shocking or disgusting or a problem to, because they realize if I agreed with them, I would agree with them. And there is a better ecumenism, which is much, I would say, much better than the polite ecumenism, where we don't talk about whether or not the suffering servant is Jesus, where we don't talk about, okay, so what do Jews believe about Isaiah 53? Or then the polite one. And so this idea that, oh, it's I should, or you should, more to the point, believe that somehow it's better if Jordan Peterson. Well, if that is the case, then I will leave it to God. Um, I'm sorry, I'm going to subject you guys to one of my favorite stories, but I love telling stories. Um, so there were three students of the Maggid of Mizrich, who was the student of the Baal Shem Tov, and they were walking down the street, and one of them was Reb Baruch, who was the grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, and he was very rich and very strict. And he was known for being a, harsh type of guy. And one of them was Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev, who his moniker has become Ohev Israel, the one who loves Israel. And he was known as a very kind and gentle person. And the third student, the youngest student, was the founder of the Hasidic dynasty I belong to, which should tell you who's going to have the best answer here. And they were walking down the road, and they saw a farmer, a Jewish farmer, who was wearing his phylacteries and wearing his prayer shawl and shoveling muck in the horse stalls while saying his morning prayers. And Reb Baruch sees this, and he becomes very angry. And he says, if I were God, I would strike him down where he is. How dare he profane these holy objects and the prayers while he's shoveling muck. And Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev said, if I were God, I would make the man exceedingly wealthy, so he never had to shovel muck again, and he would never feel that he had to interrupt his prayers with such menial work. And the Alter Rebbe said, if I were God, the world would be exactly as it is. And so if I were God, the world would be exactly as it is. But at the same time, we also have a normative vision. And I don't think we need to get rid of that normative vision in order to accept the sovereignty of God in the world. We can speak truth and believe in the Logos and believe in Dia Logos, in sharing the truth as we see it with each other and living the truth in our lives, while at the same time accepting the sovereignty of God. And now I'm going to stop preaching at you guys.
Some things.
Yeah, it's a good story, Jacob. I'll keep that in my back pocket. I won't have the guy's names though, so it'll be a
3 guys.
it'll be a skinny rabbi, a fat rabbi, and a young rabbi.
Three students of the Baal Shem Tov will work.
That's good. That's right.
If we've discussed the subject, I do have other things I do want to ask you guys about, but I don't want to dominate the discussion with me being so talkative.
I mean, my thought is just, I agree with your view of what healthy ecumenism looks like. Mm-hmm. I think the conversations of what does everybody agree in common and let's just plant our flag there are old, and I mean,
maybe they had their time and place.
Yeah.
To reduce prejudices and increase tolerance, less violence. That's nice.
Yeah, that's nice. But I don't, there's always radical fundamentalists, but I don't think the major problem in America and Canada is, Catholics and Protestants and atheists and Jews killing each other because they can't see common ground. Like, that's not the problem. So I don't, like you said, I think it had its purpose, and I think it doesn't have the same role anymore. And the kind of conversations we want to have are the kind where, like you said, you really are here to engage other people. And the voices that are most engaging and interesting are people who have a perspective. And they
Mhm.
aren't afraid of the truth that other people might bring, because they follow truth, and that's what they value, and they don't worry about that. But that doesn't mean that they come without anything in their pockets, you know. So I do very much value that, and I would like to find, whether it's the suffering servant or another something else, I would like to find something to put at the center. I think, Jacob, that it is a very generous idea to say, well, why
Mhm.
don't we put Christ at the center, or Jesus Christ, or like, that's a very generous thing to do. And it's something that you can do more effectively than we can do, because otherwise it just feels like saying, I want to put my camp at the middle and my vision at the middle, and everybody else, why don't you come rally around my flag? And it's very different if you were to say, okay, here's an icon that I'm not super close to. Like you said, there's sort of like this trajectories, and you're more on the outside. So for you to be able to do that is very different than, I think, you know, especially someone like Father Eric, to say, okay, everybody come, let's circle around Jesus and let's get this person.
By the way, he's literally right here.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I'd say the problem before was people killing each other over religion, and now the problem is they don't talk to each other. One of the most striking moments in my doctoral studies was I was doing a placement at a practice that actually mostly did work with the Catholic Church, and the other pre-doctoral student was an atheist guy. And I think it was probably 3/4 into our time there. And he just like randomly turned to me and was like, you know, Eamon, I'm so glad that I got to meet you, because I'd never met a Christian before. And this friend was gay as well. And he said, I thought that all Christians just wanted to stone gay people. So I thought that I was glad that you're not like that, and Christians aren't like that. And he's maybe 10 years younger than me, but I was struck. I was like, wow, you know, there are people in their 20s, 30s that they've maybe never really talked to somebody who's religious before, and just sort of left to whatever their side imagines the other is like, and that only is transformed through engaging and actually talking about what you believe, so that some of those misconceptions can be dealt with. And then you'll see where there are genuine differences as well. And that was my experience doing assessments for the Catholic Church. It was like, oh, all these things I heard as a Baptist about Catholics growing up, and a lot of these things aren't true, and that wouldn't have happened without the time spent together and really getting to hear what they really think. You know, to your point, Jacob.
So, next question. We talk about centered groups, but at some, I think there is also a necessity for bounded groups. I think there are people who, I think you need to be willing to exclude some people from the conversation because they are problems, and they, you need sometimes to be able to say, no, you are outside. Where do we put our boundaries? What is not acceptable? What is outside in this part of the internet?
Well, I think some of the easy ones are like, what's outside are so like personal attacks. When you move away from discussing ideas and you're just mad at somebody, and now you just are trying to do a character assassination, or you're just going to, just be personally attacking others. That's outside. Oh, of course, I'm probably speaking right away as the perspective of a mod, right? I'm like, what are the things that make me delete your post and talk to their mods and say, do we need to think about kicking them off? So it's like, if you are going to be personally attacking other people, if you won't engage with other people in good faith, you straw man their arguments, you come in, you say, oh, well, you said this, and they never actually said that, and you won't take correction on that. You're not actually a good faith dialogue partner. You're bullying, you're pushing. Now, obviously, that's like a judgment call about when it crosses that line or when someone's just emotionally worked up. But those are things where it's like, that's not the right spirit. That's not what we're trying to do here. I think there's lots of conversations where it's like, I don't even want to entertain those conversations. I don't want to have the conversation of, is pedophilia okay? I'm like, no, that's not a conversation, and I'm not willing to hear both sides. Like, nope. There are just some topics where I'm like, those topics are so morally repugnant that I refuse to even accept them as like reasonable questions that we should be asking as a society. Like, no, there's just some things that are obviously out of bounds. And I don't want to hear your moral argument for why it's okay. So that would be my first couple of things.
And what's tricky about it is we can intuitively know when somebody else is participating in the same thing that we are, right? Like, are you playing the same game that I'm playing? I know game's not the best word for it, but I hop onto the server and there's this crazy guy, Sam Adams, and he doesn't believe in the Trinity, and it's like, what's up with that? But like, he didn't tip me off, first off, because he wasn't claiming to be a Catholic who didn't believe in the Trinity, so it's like, he's already outside the wire on that bit there. But also, it's just like, he was just there. He was making his points. He was, making his points, doing the back and forth. You could tell intuitively on levels that you couldn't reduce to an algorithm, that somebody's playing the same game. It's a participatory doing. We're doing the same kind of conversation, and so basically all of that, bad faith arguments, and personal attacks have nothing to do with that game. But we can't just like have an AI do it.
Let me push back against the personal attack thing, because I think there's a lot of people who will misunderstand what I think is the nugget in what you're saying. First of all, it's not a personal attack for me to say, I think you're wrong. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mean that I have to start every sentence with, I think. I can just say, you're wrong. And in our little corner of the internet, we should understand that, of course, that's just my opinion, without, that's just your opinion, man. Right? And at the same time, I mean, yeah, I think part of the problem is when you have strict rules, people will try to game those rules. Mm-hmm. Will try to play games with those rules. Mm-hmm. And I was speaking to a friend of mine who actually works at Google. And by the way, Dr. Andani is a Muslim scholar who is, I would actually love to have included in this discussion. He has been on Sam's channel several times, I believe. So Thunder Bay was a conference that we had that actually Eamon and Kathryn put on in Thunder Bay, Canada. And the discussion is about where our community is going to go in the future. And I wanted to highlight Dr. Andani partially because I think we really need to have a direct invitation to Muslims to be included in the conversation.
Mhm.
And while Dr. Andani is from a very particular and somewhat controversial, um, what do I even call it? Um, Denomination is a bad word for it, but tradition within Islam. Um, I, I certainly welcome his participation, partially because the Muslims who are very ready to it's called takfir, to call him a heretic, may be the precise types of people we don't want to include, but unfortunately, they their voices are very loud on the internet. Let's put it that way. And I highly recommend community of interpretation. Not exactly sure. That's so we call it our little community. Actually, Dr. Andani, if I had your contact information, I would send you a. You know what? I am actually just going to put the link in, and
We're opening it up.
only to Dr. Andani for now,
Ah,
because I really would like to have Dr. Andani join us if he can. Um, but what was I saying?
You were pushing back on personal attacks and wanting to clarify what that meant.
What constitutes one? Yeah.
Right. And you know, disagreeing with you is not a personal attack on you, and people have to use their, you know,
what
many people say that I attack people personally, and I would like to think that I really don't, despite the fact that any time the question of the Trinity comes up, I will say that it is in fact welcome, Dr. Andani. Um, I will say that it is in fact idolatry. I'm sorry.
what I meant by personal attacks was more like if I were to attack your personal history, your appearance, I'm going at you as a person. I'm completely avoiding ideas, and I've just shifted into an assault, which I don't see you do those things, Jacob. So I think it's different.
Dr. Andani, do
Hey,
you
how are
like to
you?
introduce?
Hello. First, I just wanted to say thank you to you because I know this week you sort of stood up for me in that other stream with Khalilullah, and I heard what you said, and you know, you were not buying what he was selling. Um, so I appreciate that because I couldn't even. I think they've like put me like they blocked me in that chat, so like he can come and say all these things about me, and I can't even respond. So you were my
I
only
have to
advocate
say,
on that thing.
yeah, unfortunately, while I've been trying to, I I've been trying to engage the Muslim community, and certainly you have as well. Honestly, I don't know if you saw Jordan M. Just put out a video. Uh, Doctor somebody destroys Jordan Peterson, and it was a very serious like destroy, and the Muslim community has been very unhappy with Dr. Peterson's message to the Muslims, and it's like, what? I'm sorry, when you act like little children, expect to be treated like little children, and if you cannot have a discussion with an Ismaili Muslim, and their problem wasn't even with Ismaili, so Ismaili Islam has been very um, influential throughout Muslim history, and Dr. Andani is a scholar of Muslim history. And but it is a tradition within. I hope the word tradition is correct, within Shia. Islam, and it is now a minority position within Shia Islam, and Shia Islam is a minority position within the greater Muslim community. And part of what people have been um, very unhappy with Dr. Peterson is that he told uh, Sunni and Shia Muslims that they need to stop fighting. And the response I've gotten is, who are you to tell us to stop fighting? Well, I'm sorry, but with the massacres of Shia Muslims, the genocide of Shia Muslims in southern Iraq and in other parts of the Middle East. I didn't mean to completely waylay this discussion, but at the same time, and actually, I would like to know what Dr. Andani thinks of the idea of centering this group around the concept of the suffering servant, because I think for Christians that would be acceptable. I believe for most Jews, the concept of suffering servant would be acceptable. I don't know if it would be as acceptable in the Muslim community, but since we're having this discussion, I really I welcome your participation, Dr. Andani.
I mean, you do have in Shia tradition the notion of redemptive suffering, right? Like Imam Hussein and many of the Shia imams were like massacred or persecuted by certain political authorities, and Shia Muslims like commemorate, they remember that suffering. So you do find in the Shia tradition some even parallel, like what happened to Imam Hussein and what happened to Jesus on the cross and this sort of thing. Sunni tradition, I think some Sufis, the mystical tradition of Islam, they will talk about suffering, but more as an individual thing, like, for God tries his servants with suffering and pain and loss to purify their soul. So it's more of an individualized thing in the Sunni tradition. In the Shia tradition, remembering the suffering of God's righteous ones and crying for them is a devotional act.
Any responses, or we can go back to the discussion we were having about a bounded set and what rules we would establish to say, okay, maybe if the idea, I do like the idea of the suffering servant as center, and obviously we're not making any decisions here. I don't think any of us are authorized in any way to make decisions, but I think this might be a useful discussion for this corner of the internet going forward. And as far as rules for maybe what is out of bounds, if anybody wants to contribute more to that discussion, yeah. Dr. Eamon, I nominate you to speak.
Where my mind was going was there's a process of learning how to engage people that way, the way that we're looking for. And but we can say what you're not allowed to do. Positively, there needs to be an eye to, what are the necessary skills, character, perspectives that allow somebody to engage in that way. I think even over the last year or so, Kathryn and I have engaged with some other Christians who maybe you're not as open and to those discussions. And yet we'd say that they're still, in many ways, lovely people. And that we even would say that it's like, oh yeah, I can see myself 10 or 15 years ago being very much like they are right now currently. And if this is going to grow, this conversation and the participants in it, there needs to be some thought in the direction of how do you cultivate that? How do you help people learn how to do that? And that might, if we can articulate that, maybe that helps us in discerning what is really out of bounds more clearly.
Part of the fun thing is that, I don't think, let's say, when I entered seminary, that I would have been able to engage, or when I was kind of in my early years of formation, right? Because there's something about just a certain level of maturity in your faith, right? And most reasonably functioning faith traditions will produce a type of maturity that gives you confidence there. But there's no way to become mature without passing through that immature stage. So we do need to give people a little bit of grace in that. I might have come in, at 22, I might have come into this corner of the internet really swinging hard. Whereas when I was 27, 5 years, but 5 big years, I think, I find this stuff, so.
Well, because I think generally, with politics just seeping into everything, and since politics is in every corner of our lives, some of it's by design, some of it just happens. It's people are being trained to have that knee-jerk reaction, the us versus them, and they don't have the psychological structures necessary to really engage, and they're not learning it from anywhere. And maybe there's no way to systematize that. I think that there is a process, certainly, of maturity. I even think, I guess, in our work as therapists, often, like, you're working with couples, it's like, okay, they're coming out swinging at one another, and you're laying some ground rules, and then you're teaching skills. Doing a lot of teaching skills that people don't have to regulate emotion, and to even be able to sort through in their own mind what they're thinking, and to have the tools to reach out to someone else. And I see people learn that regularly. Those are similar tools that I think people are using in this corner of the internet to communicate with one another. Yeah.
So when you're doing this with somebody, do you have to overcome fear? Is that
Oh,
the big
man.
thing?
Big time. I would say my biggest failures as a therapist in my early years it was almost always marriage counseling, and it would be couples just like laying into one another. And I remember this one couple, they were in their 50s. It's amazing they were even willing to see me. In a way, I think I was like 29 at the time. And the wife and husband would swing at each other, and I would intervene somewhat timidly early on. And I remember it's probably like a month in meeting with them, just thinking like, man, they're coming here and they're just beating each other up every week, and I just need to suck it up and stop this from happening and facilitate something, because they clearly can't do it on their own. And so my heart was absolutely racing before those meetings. I think 12 years out from that, at this point, my pulse doesn't raise 1 beat per minute. It's just sort of flat at this point. But yeah, it was very nerve-wracking. I had to learn how to regulate myself. There's a steep there.
But even coming into the capacity, I was talking more about your clients and with yourself. Talking about how to approach situations in a new way, how to open up new possibilities in a relationship, those sorts of things. You've got to be able to be brave to do that. Mm-hmm. And that's I think that's maybe it's like, I've got to be able to hear a really good argument from Jacob every once in a while, right? It does happen, ladies and gentlemen. It does happen. A really good argument from Luke Thompson, a really good argument from Sam Adams, a really good argument from Bazzani, whatever he's how to say his name, and just like not have that crush me, because a really good argument is like, oh man, I never thought of that before. I don't have any response to that right now, but you got to be able to just stand there and not have that threaten your identity, even as you acknowledge what's going on there.
Another piece to it is trust. That allows you to have some of the courage. I think that you're just setting yourself up in front of a firing squad. And
right, this person isn't just trying to trick me.
Yeah, and early on when I'm working with a couple, I realize if they trust me, even if they don't trust one another, I can facilitate that. They can borrow from me until they build that up in their relationship. And so you can loan other people that trust if they trust you, and that's where I think some of the success of the Thunder Bay event was because the audience, the attendees were able to borrow the trust that the speakers had for one another, with one another. Like Paul trusts Dr. Vervaeke not to just, try to dress him down in front of everyone. And that creates the space.
Yeah, like I think a lot of what has worked to build the kind of conversations that we value and we want to facilitate is modeling from the guys that we watch, right? Modeling the Dialogos. And then when you see, because it's hard to put the boundaries around how do you do that. But if you watch it enough, you're like, oh, okay, I get the feel of it. I've got the flavor. I could put my toe in. I can try to do that. It's more easily caught than taught.
Well, and where the idea for the conference started, even before we were driving to Sioux Lookout, was I was mowing the lawn out at the lake, listening to Dr. Vervaeke and Vanderklay talk with one another. That I think Vanderklay was running through a presentation or a talk or idea he had, and was just asking for honest feedback. And I was like, that's it right there. That's real trust. That's modeling a conversation from two different perspectives. And if people could see that, then they could embody it.
And it's trust in the other person that you're talking with, which is essential, but it's also trust in, we could say it's simply God, or we could say the truth, right? And that if what this person is saying is actually true, it won't destroy me, right? It'll make me good. It'll build me up. It'll make me strong. Yeah. That's hard enough.
I don't know how much time you guys scheduled for this. I am willing to go all the way until sundown, because sundown is actually the Festival of Booths. But if people are, I think this can be the beginning of a larger and longer conversation that I think our community needs to have. I want to invite you guys, if there's things I haven't put on the table, which you want to put on the table, I want to discuss those. We can take questions from the audience. We actually have, according to YouTube, there are 12 people watching, and usually that's an undercount. And if you guys are willing, we could even have other people, if they are willing to turn on their cameras, please. We can have other people join us for the conversation, but I want to stop dominating this conversation and let you guys, the more important people, take over.
Sure. So I've been reading Reformations. That was a book Paul was reading about a year ago. It's a history of Europe, basically 1450 to 1650. looking to what the Protestant reformers were asking for. And I'm reading through this and I'm like, dang, a lot of that's been delivered, maybe 400 years after the fact, but let's take a look. We've got biblically based preaching, right? Now, I'm not going to say there's no such thing as a topical homily in a Catholic church, but the standard is, you go to the gospel and the first reading, the second reading, responsorial psalms. That's the first thing you talk about, right? So we've partially delivered that. And I was very amused when we were at the Urban Abbey, and the gospel reading of the day was the parable of the dishonest steward. Which meant that they were using the Revised Common Lectionary, because that's what we were reading in the Catholic churches as well. And Paul completely ignored it. But we'll let that aside. The Protestant Reformation has transformed the practices of indulgences within the Catholic Church. We no longer accept alms for indulgences. Right? That practice is completely reprobated. We no longer give out paper certificates saying that you've earned an indulgence. It is entirely an oral agreement. And we no longer place specific time frames on a partial indulgence. It's either just a partial indulgence or a plenary indulgence. We're not specifying that. Clerical celibacy, well, we still have that, but it's not attached to all the money anymore, right? And I think that was a major reason for complaint, is that all these clerics, like if you wanted to enter into these positions of power, you had to do this celibacy thing. Nowadays, I'm decently well taken care of, but there's no... There's not the money there used to be. So that's a good thing. We now have liturgy in the vernacular. I think we might have overdone it a little bit, but that's beside the point. You now have the liturgy in the vernacular. And the cult of the saints just ain't what it used to be. Certainly people now think of saints as their friends in heaven, like not so that they can go to God for them, but it's just nice to have friends in heaven. And as examples, which I think was more the thing. And we still have the papacy. We still have the real presence of the Eucharist, which is trouble for some Protestants, and the Mass is a sacrifice. So what I'm saying is that real transformation is possible, and hopefully we don't have to have wars to do that in the future. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
Hey!
I actually really appreciated you running through the list like that. I'm like, hey, that actually is very impressive.
And I don't feel like this feels like I read about some of this medieval stuff and I'm like, I can see the complaints,
Mm-hmm.
So I don't feel like I'm being untrue to myself, untrue to the tradition that goes all the way back, past the year 800. I don't feel like we're being untrue to that.
So the Reformation is over, and the Protestants can all come back.
No, we still have the Pope, and we still have the Mass as a sacrifice.
Oh,
those are things that aren't going away. I have thoughts on the Pope, but I won't share them now. They're not ready. They're not ready for YouTube.
This is wise.
Wilsons, what do you have to say for yourselves?
I'm sorry. No.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's so many things to talk about. So many things to talk about. But I'll go in this direction. I think in Protestant circles, what I've observed over the last 15, 20 years has been a desire to be more grounded historically in our beliefs, and that's meant some Protestants sort of moving more into like the Anglican Church or other Protestant traditions that go back further, and I think that speaks to just how people feel like they're floating in air. Think of I was actually asked to do a training this coming week for some pastors out in Atlantic Canada, and they sent me the email last week. They're like, "Oh, could you do an hour on identity and its implications for pastoral ministry?" And I'm like, "Okay, I need a little longer than a week. I think to prep and have it be up to snuff." But who we are is there's an intergenerational element to it. There's a historical, and as soon as you rip that out, I don't know how people define themselves. I see that in the Indigenous communities that I'm in, where it's like you go back 1 or 2 generations, and it's like we don't know. Residential schools sort of erased all of that, and as much as they talk about that, and I think it's true, it's not unique to them. My non-Indigenous clients, I see the exact same thing. And I think horizontally speaking, one of the strengths of this corner of the internet is it can provide some sort of identity. I think a historical grounding is necessary for it to have that kind of confidence. I think it's really, really difficult not to. I think that's why the non-religious people that I know in my personal circles, I think that's why they keep going to Buddhism, because there's some sort of historical grounding in something, and I don't think that it's possible to be an atheist and you're just sort of a 21st century person just out there and not really like sort of lose your mind eventually. And so what you were saying, Father Eric there, I just think, that historical piece, it touches down on that, why are we where we're at? And I think that's also is a pathway back towards some more unity. So I don't know how we would tackle that in terms of identity. I think that has to be front and center. I think people are literally dying for a lack of it, and the broader culture is trying to answer that question, I think, to spectacularly horrible results, to horrible effect. And I think we need some bridges there if more people are going to come in, and maybe that is through the suffering servant. Everyone's familiar with that, and dimensions of it have been inverted. I think a lot of what's there in the woke movement is the inversion of everything that we see in the suffering servant. So I think that there's some real power there. Because people do identify with their suffering, and you can ground them in something much richer, just in that. See, all the different faith traditions talk about this idea, this concept. Yeah, I don't know. So I'm interested to see where that conversation goes, and see it as meaningfully connecting to larger issues of identity and purpose that people are they're drowning in.
Before Matt left, he did have a parting thought. Suffering servant is insufficient because without further contextualization, it's not clear why that's even good. I have to say that yes, there it is not clear to a lot of people why that's even a good thing. When you say the suffering servant, you're actually talking about something to aspire to be. And part of, for me, I think in reaction to Christianity, we have somebody from Twitch, and I have to include this. As a barber, I love this podcast, and that the men's faces is the perfect evolution of beards. Okay. This is the farthest thing from a perfect evolution of beards.
You're stage 1. And then Father Big Mac is stage 2, and Eamon is stage 3.
Okay. But I think in reaction to Christianity, a lot of, especially more, do I call it modern, mainline Jewish denominations have have had such a reaction to the concept of a suffering servant. And of course, we have the prosperity gospel, which I think we can all agree is heretical, where you assert that God would never let his servants suffer. And you know, for me, I think yes, there is the missing context of recognizing the value, the aspirational value of being the suffering servant. Um, at the same time, Jordan Peterson, I think part of what made his fame is to say life is suffering, and how do you do that, right? How do you live your life through that?
Yeah, that's where my mind was going to, Jacob. I thought, well, there's at least a foot in the door with suffering just being a reality, and the servant part. Yeah, I guess there's some debate there, but what are you really going to do? Are you going to become more powerful and crush everyone? Are you going to hide and try to drown yourself in pleasure or avoidance? And maybe that's a sorting, natural sort of point of departure for people. If that doesn't sound good to you, either you're just not suffering at all, or you think that there are other options that you should pursue in your suffering than serving other people and dying to self and being more outward oriented. Then yeah, this is probably not the group for you.
I think Matt's point that without context, that's a phrase for a lot of people that it doesn't track, if they don't have a faith background. But I don't see why we couldn't provide context for it.
Yeah.
Like, if that's the issue, which is a fair issue, then, give it some context, and that's a good thing.
Speaking of Bazani, people in the West think suffering is something unusual going on, as if it's not the norm, and therefore a personal injustice. I think certainly victim culture, this idea that there must be some oppressive form which we have some capacity to definitely take off, to make disappear, this utopianism. And again, I think the prosperity gospel is the worst form of this, right? This idea that and one thing I've particularly spoken to a lot of people about is, for example, the people who will tell gay people, oh, well, once you accept Christ in your life, you will no longer be gay. And they accept Christ in their life and they're still gay. And that has been, I know, crushing to a lot of the faith of people, but it's like, the people who say things like that, I wonder what kind of lives they are living. Is your life really that free of sin? Like, I hear people tell me, oh yeah, accept Jesus and you will no longer sin. And I'm like, are you telling me you think you're no longer sinning? And to some extent, I guess they are.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. It's a particular level of self-awareness.
Or lack thereof, yeah.
Or lack thereof, yep. Yeah.
Oh dear.
Yeah, well, that's what happens, I guess, when you try and emetize the eschaton.
Yeah.
Suffering is the norm. This life is not meant to be like paradise. You chose the steps to better yourself, and you
Your life condition.
Your life condition. Okay. Polar Knights, you're obviously new to this. corner of the internet. I did not actually include links to things, but hopefully, I mean, I think we've been discussing a lot of very important things about where our community is going to go in the future. Um, I do want to continue this discussion. Um, I think part of it is going to have to be, well, you guys have your consciousness and conscience channel and your Discord server, and I've been poking Father Eric about starting a Catholic server. he's
I
not.
I don't want a mod. I don't want to be a mod. I got enough going on here. I got
Um,
enough people to moderate here.
I invite some of our Catholic audience, and I do know we have a Catholic audience, to consider volunteering under the direction of the magisterium to start a.
I'm not a part of the magisterium. I'm not a bishop.
Well, you can put us in touch with the magisterium.
Yes, I could do. That I could do.
Yes. No, and this has been one of my things in my little drums to beat in this corner of the internet is engaging. I think a lot of us, and I keep on saying I am the most Protestant of us all. As Protestants, we engage the Catholic Church through individuals and individual churches. And I don't think that's the proper way to engage with the Catholic Church. It's not about Bishop Barron alone. It's not about even Father Eric Seitz alone, even though he is my favorite candidate for Pope currently. It, I think you have to engage the Catholic Church as a church, and every time I bring it up, it lands like a bombshell. But majority of Christians are Catholic, and you just have to accept that. 50.2% last time I checked of the Christians in the world, self-identified Christians in the world, are Catholic. This is the largest and longest lived organization in human history. And so if we are going to be serious in our ecumenism, if we're going to be serious in, even I would say, engaging Christianity, you cannot do it, despite the fact that in the United States we often try to do it, without engaging the Catholic Church as a church. Yeah, that's my little drum, and you guys can comment.
Well, I'll put Father Eric, in charge of doing that for us. So
Yeah. I do worry sometimes, Jacob, that someday you'll call some archdiocesan chancery and ask for a engagement from an official, and they won't know what to do with you.
They already don't know what to do with me. Well,
like, can you send a representative to this meeting? And they'd be like,
no.
Yeah. I encourage everybody to get Sally Joe's little book, with the church surrounded by the roses. I've been thinking about that a lot recently. The church is surrounded by the roses, and they smell nice and they're beautiful, and they're going to choke you off and kill you if you don't cut them down a little bit. So, Mark Lefebvre was passing those out at Thunder Bay, and yeah.
Yeah, this is actually a Sally Joe original that I have in the background. Yeah, the artists. Hopefully, the artists are going to save us. And yeah, I mean, again, hopefully this is an ongoing conversation, and it's not an easy conversation, but I think we have something going right now that's pretty awesome, and I think it is something that can and should grow. And I look forward to the day I want to see large conferences.
Hmm.
And those large conferences don't need to mean the death of the small conferences.
Yeah.
They can hopefully be an outgrowth of that. And I don't think the large channels, I mean, we have some large channels, and I would actually like to see, I've discussed this several times with Paul Vanderklay, and I discussed it with Kathryn. Actually having a 24/7 channel for our little corner of the internet, where if we need to, we will play, but it won't have a backlog. It will just be a channel, where we have different people come on and talk. And if you want to hear more of that, there will be a link to that actual channel. And so, um, I I want to see all the little bubbles coming together into a larger hive without necessarily, a lot of people want their bubble to grow. Sure, would I love if rather than 500 subscribers, I had 500,000 subscribers? Yes, I would. But A, I don't think that's ever going to happen. B, that's not the flavor that a lot of us need and want. I keep on going back to Jethro, and when he goes to Moses and he says, um, you need leaders of tens and you need leaders of thousands and things that come up. And to some extent, we need that Moses. I don't know who that Moses exactly is going to be, and it has to be a process of bubbling up. But if we don't have the hierarchy, and part of the reason I do keep on pointing to the Catholic Church is because subsidiarity, the Catholic doctrine of subsidiarity, is one of the probably the most successful way of keeping organizations local at the same time, um, having a structure that at the top, look, you have an organization of 1 billion people, and that is an amazing thing to have. And doesn't mean any of us here are a huge fan of the current pope or the previous pope or whatever, but yeah, I think we have to consider hierarchy. Hierarchy is incredibly important. And unfortunately, one of the things we keep on thinking is, oh, well, we need a king we can all agree on. And that's not how hierarchy works. You have to have bishops and priests and deacons, or however you're going to do it. And yeah, hopefully, I mean, I would like this channel to be something like that. I want my Discord server to be something like that, but I also want it to be a part of a much larger umbrella. And that's the conversation I hope we're having here.
I like it.
I like subsidiarity too. But seriously, like the words Catholic social teaching were always suspicious to me until I learned subsidiarity was a part of that, and then I'm like, oh, that's what I've always thought.
Yeah. So subsidiarity, I mean, I recommend people look it up, but it is the idea that every issue should be dealt with the most local unit that can deal with that issue. So if it is something that can be dealt with on an individual or parish level, then it should be dealt with on a parish level. And if it needs a diocese or archdiocese or national conference or to go all the way to the Vatican, then the test of elevating an issue is whether the jurisdiction is actually competent to deal with it at that level. And yeah, it works. And I think, to some extent, for example, my Discord server has become the Jewish/Messianic Discord server. And there are things that we discuss on the Jewish/Messianic thing. And we talk a lot more about the Dead Sea Scrolls than most people do. And, maybe we have to consider arranging ourselves in smaller units, which are willing to be under bigger umbrellas. And a large part of that is discussions, but a large part of that is also an attitude of service, of, okay, I don't need, if I would be a leader, I need to be a servant first, right? And if you cannot serve a community, I cannot serve a community of 500,000. I can barely serve a community of 500. And if you cannot be the servant of that large of a community, then maybe you need to recognize that and limit your attempted reach to who you can serve.
Very good.
Very good.
Well, I've got a crock pot full of sausage and sauerkraut. It's calling my name.
That sounds beautiful. The whatchamacallit seems to have kind of died down, the conversation on YouTube and Twitch. I am going to end the broadcast here, and to be continued. Please like, subscribe, comment, and make your own videos and have your own conversations about these topics.
Thanks for having us on, Jacob. And thank you, Wilsons, for organizing the Consciousness and Conscience Conference in Thunder Bay, Ontario. It brought a lot of joy to my life.
Our pleasure.
And lots of other people's, too.
Thank you. We had a wonderful time.